public relation and partnership at the Association of the Forestry in Indonesia, called the Association of the Indonesian Forest Concessionaires Holder. And we have like 500 members across Indonesia. And today, I think we have what you call this, the theme about storytelling to communicate climate crisis. And I think the most important things, before we discuss about this, I would like to invite to the stage the distinguished panelists. First, we have Greg Walker. He is International Environmental Communication Association. Please go to the stage, Greg. And he's the one, you know, his background quite amazing. And he will be speaking about the theory and practices on the environmental storytelling. The next panelist, I would like to invite Ethan Spener. Ethan Spener, he is an international director, the Climate Reality Project. And I think he will be talking about climate reality storytelling to the mainstream, to the climate crisis and its solution. The third panelist, I would like to invite Beatrice Tulagan. She is field organizer 350 organization. Is that true? Welcome. And the fourth panelist is Ibu Amanda Katili. She is a manager climate reality in Indonesia. And I think she will be talking about waving sustainability stories to tell. And the last panelist, which is, you know, Indonesian, I believe that Indonesian knows him very well. He is Nicholas Saputra, Indonesian actor and film producer. Please give a big applause to the panelists. Okay, every panelist will be presenting like 10 minutes. So please keep focused on what you would like to convey, the message. And after that, there is a video that we would like to play also. But before, I would like to give the opportunity to the panelists to say something or present something. I just want to share with all of you, the audience, that the most important thing on the communication process is the behavior change. And how we do that? We're utilizing all the channeling, all the media, you know, from the normative, conventional into the digital media, which is now we are on the 4.0 industry. So how we utilizing that? And how we utilizing the sender, message, channeling, receiver to change the behavior to the climate change. Okay? I would like to invite the first speakers, the first panelists, to share with us. Please come, Greg Walker. The time is yours. You're welcome. Give public applause to him. Thank you.
And there should be a set of slides that I'll highlight we can pull those up on the screen. I think they're on that back computer. Yeah, there we go. Now, I'd like to start, I should stay by the microphones. I'd like to start with, well, let me share with you if I do this right. There we go. I'm going to highlight this idea that we are all storytellers, talk about the significance of stories, and an important theory of storytelling called the narrative paradigm, and then to focus more on the practical value of stories, things I think that you know. But I'd like to start with a little activity. If you would turn to the person next to you, and I want you to each answer one of these questions. Not all three, but one of these three. First one is, why are you concerned about climate change? Tell the person next to you why that's the case. Or, why did you choose your profession and your type of work? Like public relations, for example. Or third, what event has important significance in your life? So take a moment, talk to the person next to you, pick one of those three questions. So if you do that for just a moment or two, I will be very grateful. And you're welcome to do that as well, if you want to. So, our panelists can do this as well. So why are you concerned about climate change? Or why did you choose your profession? Or what event has important significance?
people.
Okay, very good, very good.
So you're waiting for, oh, this is the
We're just
storyteller.
about done.
Okay.
So I apologize for not letting your conversations go on, but I want to ask you a question now about what you just shared with one another. When you answered one of those questions, think about this one. Did you do so with a story? My oldest son is a professor of geography. I never knew he had an interest in being a professor, but one day he said to me, when he was an undergraduate in college, he said, "Dad, I know I want to be a professor." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, that's what you do, and it looks like a good life." And there's a story there. Behind everything we do, there's a story. Now, you might not have told it now. If I gave you more time, you probably would. You could probably explore the stories behind the lives we lead as a part of the lives we lead, and we often relate that to our concern about issues. One of the people on my team here from Mediators Beyond Borders International and the other team, International Environmental Communication Association, is an 18-year-old college student. She just turned 18 before coming to the COP, and she told me that the reason she wanted to come to the COP was as a girl, she heard stories about endangered species. And she then developed an interest in nature, in wildlife, and then in climate change. We often have those stories that we share. Of course, we are all storytellers, and it doesn't really matter what our cultural identity, where we're from, what we do, what our age is. We learn through stories, and it begins in childhood. I remember my grandmother Nana and asking her to read me a story, and we value those stories throughout our lives. I'm guessing that some of you have had conversations on airplanes, perhaps even conversations you didn't want, but conversations with someone like my mother, who would immediately strike up a conversation with you whether you wanted it or not, and before long you'd be telling her your life story. Because we all do that well. Well, we know that stories personalize the impersonal, which is one of the challenges with climate change. Climate change is abstract. Climate change seems overwhelming. Climate change doesn't seem, on a day-to-day basis for many people, to be an important issue, unless, of course, they're in a very vulnerable area. If they experience a catastrophic event, that changes things. So one of the things I like about stories is that they're an equalizer. It doesn't matter, for example, what our income, what our profession, whether we're female or male, what our position is, where we're from. And that storytelling is truly a cultural universal, and it respects the oral traditions of so many cultures and communities. But what is a story? And I'm not going to read all the bullets on these slides. I'll highlight a few things and gladly make these available to anyone who might like them. But one of the people I like who writes about storytelling is a writer in the state of Oregon, where I live in the U.S. And he writes about a story is a world where every character, every action, every story element has meaning and purpose. We remember stories in part because of their structure, and stories become relatable and personal. And for us, it provides order and meaning, particularly in situations that are uncertain. Think for a moment about the first time you traveled to a country you had never visited before. It could well be that you prepared for that by asking people you knew who had been to that country to tell you a story about their experience. And in so doing, that helped provide a little bit of order and meaning and reducing uncertainty. Now, Johnson also says that people often seek something that assigns meaning. Again, he likes to use the word out of chaos. I like to use the word uncertainty. But he does that. We do that through stories, that stories give us an anchor. Stories give us something to relate to and promises a kind of dramatic journey that draws us in. It might be very vivid. And again, using his language, it makes sense out of chaos. And when we think about climate change, it's controversial. It's complex. It is, for some people, overwhelming, and we could use his word chaotic. And a story then can help us become grounded in people's experience, in people's lived experiences. Well, stories are persuasive. Now, I've been a teacher, educator for 46 years, long time. I tell my students now, I've taught longer than their parents even imagined them, much less maybe even met. And if you read my course evaluations, you'd see that students say again and again they valued my stories. I put a lot of stories into my teaching. You may do the same thing in your work. And one of the reasons I do that is that stories are influential. Stories provide vivid illustrations of concepts. And so we make decisions on the basis of good reasons, and those good reasons may include scientific data, those of us that certainly work in the climate change field, but for some people, it's a story that's going to be more powerful than some scientific study. And good reasons are determined by the audiences we interact with and will draw upon people's history, their cultural identity, their biography. And so the world becomes a set of stories. And related to that is a professor who I got to know years ago named Walter Fisher, who created something called the narrative paradigm. And he said for a story to be really a good story, it needs to be coherent. You can see the questions here. Does the narrative hang together? Do the people that are portrayed and the events in the story seem to be of one piece, seem to be realistic? And not only that, but there needs to be this concept of fidelity, that the story strikes a responsive chord. When the listener hears it, does it relate to the listener's experience? Now, when this conference is over, I will fly back to the United States. And then I will go visit my grandchildren. I have a 10-year-old granddaughter who loved the movie Frozen. I've seen it with her at least 6 times. She's already seen Frozen 2. She can't wait to talk to silly grandpa. That's what she calls me. I don't need to tell you why. But one of the things that's interesting, if you're familiar with that movie at all, is apparently Frozen 2 addresses the issue of climate change. That part of the narrative in that movie is about climate change. And I'm looking forward to having a conversation with my 10-year-old daughter about Frozen as a kind of story, Frozen 2. And I'll listen to her tell me what she thinks. And she becomes the storyteller, and I become the receiver. Well, stories, of course, need to be credible. They need to hang together. I mentioned that already. We tend to trust stories of people and events where there's a continuity of thought, motive, and action. And we respond to stories that relate positively to our identities, our cultural identity, our professional identity, our religious identity. You can come up with a number of lists of identities that are meaningful to us, how we define ourselves as people, and the values that we hold that obviously are part of the identities that we embrace. So what does this have to do then with the environment and climate change? Well, there are some ways that we can think about addressing the environment through story. One of the things that a story does, it provides a strong connection to the natural world, and it can emphasize the significance of place, which matter a lot to people, and as they tell stories about their families, their prior generations. The stories offer hope and optimism and can highlight constructive community action. But they also can draw attention to the downside, to the challenges, to the potential unintended consequences of something that might occur. Stories should be accessible. They should be credible. I've mentioned that before. They should invite participation. They should bring people in to share those stories, a kind of community approach to stories. They should be reciprocal. If I have a story to share with you, I hope that you have a story to share with me. In the brief 3 minutes I gave you to talk with one person, I hope some of that came through. The stories can be primary, they can be our own stories, or often we tell stories that we heard secondhand. And those may be every bit as powerful. And stories can provide an entry point into meaningful conversation. As an example, 3 years ago, I was working in a state in the U.S. in an area that was primarily agriculture, ranching. I went out on a ranch with an 80-year-old rancher, so a little bit older than me, a few years. I asked him as we drove on his huge ranch, what changes has he seen in his lifetime? He said, well, there's more drought. There's less rainfall. There's not as much snowpack as he remembers as a child and as a young adult. And he went on from there for about 30 minutes telling me all about these changes. He was telling me his story, and guess what I did? I said at the end of our ride, how much of this relates to climate change? And he looked at me and said, you got me. This was a conservative rancher who probably didn't vote the way I might prefer he vote. But I invited him to first tell his story, and that became an entry point into the conversation. And returning to Bill Johnson, a storyteller should be able to perceive what a story is about, understand how it relates to the audience, and at its heart, the story has to be something that the audience has a stake in. It goes back to that notion of relatability. So some concluding thoughts. Stories can be influential in ways that other forms of evidence, if you will, can't. And stories can serve a complementary function, not the only way we try to engage people in conversation and communication around climate change, but storytelling, of course, whether it's in person or whether it's through the media, can be such a powerful tool, again, as an entry point to conversation, as an opportunity to learn, as an opportunity to share experiences. So I want you to consider the ways that you, in fact, deal with storytelling. I'm going to end with one story. I want you to imagine me 45 years ago, much skinnier, no gray hair. I was a young man teaching high school in the state of Idaho, and I had a summer job as a salesperson, a salesman. And that salesman meant, as a salesman, I traveled throughout the West. Well, I like to fish. I went into a small town in Montana, a town of about 1,000 people, on a Saturday morning. I went to a corner restaurant where in one table there were three old men, now about my age, three old men sitting at the table eating their breakfast. I walked up to them, a young man, and I said, "Excuse me, gentlemen, I have an offer for you." They gave me a strange look, and I said, "I'd like to buy you your breakfast." And they said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I want to go fishing today. It's a day off. And I want to learn from you, where are the best places here to go fishing?" They looked at me strangely, and one of them said, "Okay, we'll take the deal." And then one of them ordered a second breakfast. But then we took out a piece of paper, they drew me maps, they showed me the places I could go fishing. It wasn't something I got from a guidebook. It wasn't something I got, certainly these days, from a website. And I came away with a real respect for local knowledge. And that story has stayed with me my entire life. I've used it in many, many trainings, in many classes, and it was such a profound effect on me in understanding the importance of place and the importance of local knowledge as we deal with environmental issues, including the challenges of climate change. So I want to thank you very much for your interest and look forward to the other panelists and then, of course, the conversation that we might have. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Greg. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that's Greg sharing about the theories. In Indonesia, we call it like how to write a story. Usually the story is verbal or non-verbal. When you're talking about verbal communication, so it means how you make in order the story. Usually in Indonesia, or especially journalists, they're referring to 4W and 1H. When, what, who, why, and how. It's a very simple, and I think every one of you knows about it. Okay, goes to the next speakers, next panelists. I would like to invite Ethan Spener, International Director, the Climate Reality Project. And I think he will be talking about climate reality storytelling to mainstream to the climate crisis and its solution. Ethan, please, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. As was said, I'm Ethan Spanner. I'm the International Director for the Climate Reality Project. We're based in DC, but we have branches all over the world, including in Indonesia, where Amanda leads our activities. I don't have any slides. I think I'll show you later why I don't have any slides and that they would be far inferior to some of the things that Climate Reality does. But I also think that some of the things that I'm going to tell you are going to be very similar to the things that Greg said. There's a reason for that. We are both white men from the United States. We share a certain point of view, a certain life experience. I think we probably both wish we had the hair we had as younger men. But in saying that, I will say that I think that it's important for you to compare what Greg and I say with the other panelists and also with the individuals who you've shared your own stories with, and who you'll continue to share your stories with both after this panel presentation, but also throughout the short remainder of the COP here in Madrid. So why do we tell stories? I've recently read an article in the New York Times by a woman named Charlotte Ducan. She's with the Dark Mountain Project, which is a sort of more literary organization. And she was speaking about the Extinction Rebellion, which I'm sure we all know in this room, and why it's been so successful and why it's had so much staying power. And she was saying fossil fuels are an essential part of our modern life. You may have taken a boat here, you may have rode a bike here, you may have taken a train here to Madrid, but at the end of the day, we still use the toothbrush that's made of plastic probably. That has oil in it, that's a fossil fuel. The chairs that you're sitting in are made of fossil fuels. Probably the stage that we're standing on is made from fossil fuels. We can't just stop and say, we're going to change it all right now. Not with the mindset that we have. So how do we rethink modern life? And what does storytelling have to do with that? I think it has a lot to do with changing your own perspective, changing the paradigm within which we live. And Extinction Rebellion has done such a good job of this in the sense that they use art to change the way we think. That's really why we go see art. I was able to go to the Museo Reina Sofia the other day. I'm not an artist. I, in fact, always get the listening guided when I go to a museum because I know that I'm not going to fully understand this piece of art. But what I understand each time is it reflects a certain interior monologue of the artist. It reflects a certain time period that you're in. It reflects a certain way of thinking that you otherwise wouldn't be able to consider because you're stuck in your own mindset as whomever you are, as a white American male, as an Indonesian, whatever it may be. We also use storytelling, I think, and especially in the climate change sense, to gain empathy and understanding. That's been used within the UNFCCC process. So at the end of the Paris negotiations, the French government set up a series of negotiations under what was called the Indaba approach. It's a South African approach to telling stories and gaining empathy with each other, ensuring that your point of view is heard. We also heard this last year in Katowice under the Talanoa Dialogue. This is a Pacific Island storytelling device to do the same thing. Fiji came up with it. They had a coup in the 90s. They had separate political divides, and they said, how are we going to take our nation forward knowing that we can't just leave this island? We are all Fijians, and we want to be able to move forward together. We have to move forward together. So they did set up this Talanoa style of negotiating that's about telling stories. How did the coup affect you? How does being a Fijian affect you? What's important in your life? And really, it was an incredible success story. And Fiji, with every country, has its own problems still. But they were able to get through it and get a functioning government going relatively quickly through a series of these Talanoas. Climate Reality itself used this same Talanoa dialogue at our Atlanta Climate Reality Leadership Core training in March. I'm not sure if any of you were there. I hope you were. I led a session on environmental justice in an international context. This whole training was around the concept of environmental justice, but since it was in Atlanta, it was primarily focused on the United States. It was focused on historically marginalized communities, people of color, low-income communities, the way that they were affected disproportionately by the climate crisis and continue to be to this day and will be into the future. By using the Talanoa style, we were able to separate people of different cultures, from different countries, from different continents, and have them share how environmental justice affected their lives, what it meant in their own context. I had met previously with a researcher from the UK who told me, you know, I'm doing this long dissertation on climate justice around the world, but I'm British. For us, it means really it's about energy prices. It's about low-income communities. What does it mean in an American context, and I got to talk about many of the same things with her as I spoke about, as were spoken about at the Atlanta training by my colleagues. So the UNFCCC is happy to use this indigenous knowledge to advance their own agenda and hear the personal experiences of other negotiators, but I do want to say that they're not always listening to the personal experiences of indigenous and youth, and nor are the negotiators here. And that's an important perspective to have. There's knowledge that just cannot be expressed without listening to those voices. So I want us to ask ourselves about what happened yesterday with observers when there was an unsanctioned protest. Why did that happen? Was it because people were rabble-rousers, or was it because the personal experience of those constituencies had been largely ignored? And there was only one way for them to get their voice heard, and that was by expressing their own experiences, expressing their own story. Now, we'll get to the climate reality portion here, and there are sort of two pieces, and I'll leave the main one for last. The first one is our Climate Speakers Network, which is a small program we have that's about connecting peer communities with each other. And the point of our Climate Speakers Network program is just that. How do you build and connect your own peer community with other peers and with different communities? And it goes back to that personal story. So very briefly, my personal story is, as I've said, I have privilege. I have potentially more privilege than almost anyone else in this world. I am a tall, white, Western male. I get that. It's important for me, and the reason that I started to work on climate change and started to care about climate change is because it's important for me to put that privilege at risk for those who don't have it. It's important for me to use the assets that I have for global good and to, I don't want to say help, but to, in any way I can, put myself out there at the use of those who don't enjoy the privilege that I have. In return, I've been really fortunate to expand my own understanding of what it means to be a human and in a global society, to learn from others, to shift tactics, to understand what works and what doesn't, and what a strategy really means when you're trying to enact something good. So me personally, I grew up in Ohio, the state in the United States. I almost religiously watched the Weather Channel, which at that time in the 90s and early 2000s was boring. Now they have these shows, they're chasing hurricanes, they're chasing tornadoes, they have, I think, like whale watching shows. At this time it was just weather radar and Local on the 8s, where they would show your local weather. And I loved it. I couldn't get enough of it. I would also find my favorite book every time was an atlas that I would return to. And I remember my friend Eric, oddly enough his name was Eric England, though he was American. His mother came to my mother once and said, you know, Eric's been bringing home these books about other countries, and usually he was bringing home novels, he was bringing home comic books, but he's been bringing home just recently a book about Nigeria, and I have no idea where he's gotten that. And my mom said, that's from Egypt. He's the one who's always bringing home books on different parts of the world. So these were my two passions, were weather and global society, or internationalism. And so here I am as an international director on climate change. I think at that point I learned that I had the opportunity to share my own personality and the things that I cared about with others. And if we can all do this on climate change, think about the good that we could do. So consider the privilege that you have and the knowledge that you hold, and how you can share it and how you can convey it. And take a little bit of time to think about that and then go out and do it. That's a call to action for you. So that personal story went through a few things, and this is what our storytelling technique is set up on for the Climate Speakers Network, and that is the personal story is important to connect you to those peers, to your own community, and to other communities. It's important to keep it specific. You don't need to overwhelm your listeners with stories of despair over and over. Just keep it to one thing and say, this is how this weather system. This is how this lack of finance, this is how this experience in my life, this is what it meant to me. This is how it affected me. If you keep it specific, I think you'll find that your listenership will be able to connect to it better. And then always end with a little bit of hope and a solution to those hopes. So like I said, the hope is that we're all able to share our stories and that you should go out and do it. What's the purpose of your story? We are past the point of awareness raising on climate change. And I was speaking with this about Amanda yesterday as we talk about our strategies for next year. Just getting people to know what climate change is and what's happening is not enough. It's time for action. So your final step should be concrete steps that an individual can take. Now, our methods at Climate Reality, and the reason I don't have a slideshow is because our founder and chairman, the former vice president of the US, Al Gore, has the best slideshow. I hope many of you were able to see it on, I think it was Tuesday morning, in the plenary, where he gave an hour-and-a-half slideshow. And he'll talk about, separately, we used to do this over like an 8-hour period, but now he doesn't do this at our trainings, but he would talk about the different budgets that you hold when you're telling a story, when you're giving this slideshow, and everyone that goes to our trainings is licensed to use this slideshow. What is your budget for hope? What's your budget for despair? What's your budget for action? And how do you hit that sweet spot so that you're not turning off your audience with too much despair to make them depressed, too much hope to make them think that the job is being done already, and too much action to think that it is too overwhelming for them to actually do something, because no one is too small. Every little action counts. So I'll hand it over to the next panelist, but I did want to end with one quote from that same New York Times story, and that is, quote, "We live and die by the stories we tell each other, and that story on the streets of London is changing." Thank you, and next panelist, please.
Give a big applause to Ethan. Thank you, Ethan. I don't want to keep postponing the next distinguished panelist. So I would like to invite Beatrice Tulagan, Field Organizer 350 organization. Please, the time is yours.
Hi everyone, good morning. As mentioned, my name is Beatrice Tulagan and I'm the East Asia Field Organizer for an organization called 350.org. But recently, I also founded my own media nonprofit called Climate Stories. And the reason why I'm telling you both affiliations is that I think storytelling exists in this midpoint between organizing and communicating, which is very important in our line of work. So I come from the Philippines, where climate change is not just a story, it's a daily reality. In the Philippines, you know someone, or at least you know someone or who knows someone who has suffered climate impacts, someone who has felt prey to flooding, someone who has lost their home, someone who had a family member die. And for those of you who are long-time negotiators here, you might have heard this exact story being told by one of our former negotiators, Yeb Sanyo, and a few years ago. And that's the story of the Philippines. But one thing that I don't think we're putting emphasis enough is the story of resistance by local communities. And that's where 350.org comes in. We focus a lot on organizing, yes, but we focus also on digital storytelling. So what is digital storytelling? So basically, it's using digital tools such as social media, photography, film, data visualization, mapping, to communicate what we want to communicate about the climate crisis. And often, we have so many people who are already saying enough about the science, the policy. If you're here, of course, you know about the policy and you're able to communicate to your respective delegations. But what is missing from a lot of conversations, as I've mentioned, is the struggle of local communities and how they are leading the solutions towards a renewable energy-powered society. So in the Philippines, I'll tell you one story about a community in Limay, Bataan. So in Limay, Bataan, we have a community of women and young women who are fighting against a coal plant literally beside their backyard. In 2016, unfortunately, one of them was killed by an unknown assailant. But instead of that deterring them, it only inspired them to take up the climate cause as their own. they started training their young people in climate change, and most of them are now leading climate strikes in the Philippines. And I think that's a beautiful story of turning pain into hope. Ethan talked a little bit about the narrative of hope. And right now, I'm studying under a storytelling professor who's called Marshall Gans. And he talks about granting agency into our audiences by building empathy and exploring a narrative of hope. Using digital tools to communicate climate change is effective not only because it reaches a lot more people, but it also presents our stories creatively. So, in digital storytelling, you might notice a shift now. It's not anymore long walls of text. It's not anymore long links leading to policy proposals and all that. It's more photography interspersed with narrative. It's sometimes, if for the young people here who use a lot of Instagram stories, during the climate strikes, we saw a lot of climate strikers in their own local communities using it to connect to the wider movement. And at the end of the day, I think that's what makes digital storytelling combined with organizing such powerful tools to enhance action in the climate space. I think it's because we have freedom of use for these tools and that we can reach audiences that we never know it's possible to reach until now. We all know the story of Greta, and we all know the story of the other day how she literally passed on the mic to indigenous and global South youth. I think in digital storytelling, it's important also to remember what Ethan said about privilege and also spotlighting local stories and also stories of those people who are most impacted by climate change. So for digital storytelling, I guess I can leave you with one thing, and that it's that we all have the power to become digital storytellers. It's the medium is up to you. You can use your Facebook, your Instagram, you can use mapping, data visualization, or whatever tool you're most comfortable with. But the important thing is we speak to the reality of climate change and we speak truth to power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beatrice Sulagan. Ladies and gentlemen, we heard the presentation from the three panelists, and I believe, the first panelist and the second panelist already shared with us about the theories, how we communicate about the climate crisis to the audiences. And the most important thing is when you communicate with people, when you communicate with others, the most important thing is the behavior change. So I think on the discussion, we can talk a lot about how we communicate with others, with people, with communities to change their lives to mitigate or adapt to climate change. So the behavior change it's very important. Now, for the next panelist, I would like to invite Ibu Amanda Katili, Manager Climate Reality in Indonesia, and how she, tried to change also the behavior of Indonesia, especially on the climate change issues. Ibu Amanda, the time is yours, please. Please give applause to her.
Thank you. I'm so glad that all the panelists were here because we were so nervous yesterday because yellow badges were not allowed in. 3 out of the panelists were in yellow badges, so I'm glad you're all here. And I'm also glad that 4 of us are climate reality leaders from the Climate Reality Project, where we try to mainstream the climate crisis, its solution, as well as action on the ground. Ethan is our international director, and Kelsey Evans here is our international manager. So if you would like to attend Al Gore's training, please connect with them. But what I would like to share now is weaving sustainability, where we are trying to tell some stories out of the 450 ethnic groups in Indonesia. And the main theme would be sustainable fashion, actually. This is Kendall Jenner. Sustainable fashion is one of the new area right now in the fashion industry, because the fashion industry is the 7th largest economy in the world, hundreds of trillions of dollars in line with the fashion industry. And the consequences is 10% of global emission comes from the fashion industry. Kendall Jenner made maybe about $30 million a year. But in the other parts of the world, next to the Kapuas River in Kalimantan, the longest river in Indonesia, the length is more than 1,000 kilometers. There are some local communities who live there who don't know anything about the fashion industry and what's in the outside world. And they are subsistence communities. They live basically from nature, no money exchange. They grow their own rice. They collect vegetables from the forest. And they also try to make some containers for their daily activities. So no plastics there, but they use rattan. For those of you who have never seen rattan, this is the tree. It's a sustainable resources. So it's non-timber products, but they can be used for furnitures, for containers like you see there. And they're made by these local communities for generations because there are no plastic containers. They carry their vegetables, fish from the river, rice that they harvested in those containers. And some local communities, they can make beautiful things like that, but some can only make mats because it's very difficult to shape the rattan into either round or in the shape of baskets. But there are some of those communities who can make this. And these are the women in the local communities. So they work for their household. The men don't work in some of their areas. So they do the work to the rice field, they collect fish from the river, and they take care of their children. And then when they have time, they will weave some of the rattan. It's very difficult. You saw the trees, and they have to process the rattan and make this to become containers like this. And they live very far away from each other. And with the assistance of APP, also Yayasan Dr. Shahrir, a nonprofit organization, as well as the regional government, the Climate Reality Project Indonesia work with them to train these women to make the products more marketable because they make the same products for hundreds of years just for their own need without thinking that it's a marketable product. So we have a product designer. His name is Finto. So he trained the women on how to make beautiful products like that. And he informed them that international buyers don't like chemical dyes. So don't dye your weaving products. Just use the natural products. And please observe the rattan in your area because there are several species of rattan that you can use to make beautiful stuff like that. So that's basically what we are trying to do. We work with people or the women in Kalimantan, in Borneo, because plastics are coming in and plastics are very cheap. They don't have to work hard to weave these baskets. So we try to encourage most of the women there to still weave for the market. And Finto has an international network. So after he trained them, he said, okay, I'll order 500 baskets from you with my standards. Then I can market them in Europe and other parts of the world. So basically, we are also trying to increase the women's income and letting them know that what they are doing is helping the earth. And they're really surprised that they can make beautiful products while saving the earth. That's why we call the program Weaving Sustainability. So it's trying to achieve the sustainable development goals as well as giving them confidence as well as income while preserving the earth. These are the products that are bestsellers in Europe. made by Finto, and we would like to have the women also making good products like that. And of course, Indonesia is a vulnerable country, and by doing that, Climate Reality hope that we can have more activities that help many people, as well as encouraging Nicola Saputra, who will be the next panelist, and Beatrice and others. How can we tell these stories to encourage others to do similar activities like this? Thank you.
Thank you, Bu Amanda Katili. Ladies and gentlemen, Bu Amanda and her story about the climate crisis by saying that how we communicate to the public and how Nicola Saputra also would like to share with us. And I think we have to be aware that communication always in context. And I think for the next discussion, we would like to know how to communicate differently, accordingly to the culture where we live, because it's influence the result of the communication, of effective communication. I would like to invite the last panelist, which is Nicolas Saputra. He is Indonesian actor and film producer, and he would like to present about the making of Semesta documentary. And of course, all of us would like to know why Nicolas, or Nico, his nickname, would like to make a movie or a film related to the climate change. So we will find out from him. Please come, Nico, to the stage. Thank you.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. As mentioned, as introduced before, that I'm an actor and also a producer, and I've been in the industry for 18 years, and I had no doubt that cinema is one of the most powerful tools to make change, to give an impact, because of, I think one of the reasons is that you can hold attention for more than 1 hour, 1.5 hours. And there also you can play with emotions, and this is what I believe, and that would probably answer your question why I want to make a film and why I want to be in the industry. Here today I want to show you a little bit of my latest work, which is a documentary about climate change in Indonesia, and what makes it different, what makes me excited to make this one is actually this is a new angle that's never been explored before in Indonesia to make in a cinema, which is the angle of religion, faith, and culture. Indonesians are very religious, I would say, I would confirm. 97% of us think that religion is important, and I was trying to find a way to speak about climate change, things that I've been concerned about in the past few years. But we've only heard climate change from the point of view of scientists, point of view of activists, point of view of bureaucrats, politicians, ambassadors. But I wouldn't say that it has been worked in Indonesia. So I was thinking maybe we can find something else, one angle that's very close to the heart of Indonesian, which is religion, faith, and culture. I will tell you more about the film, but I will show you 2 minutes trailer of the film that will be released next month at the end of January in the cinemas in Indonesia. Please someone help to play.
Bapak, Ibu, saudara-saudara yang terkasih, bumi ini kita sedang sakit karena bumi kita ini berubah.
Walaupun manusia, walaupun binatang, ciptaan Allah semua. Kenapa gajah turun di kampung? Kita bilang gajah yang salah. Bukan. Kita manusia yang ada pikirannya. Kalau binatang nggak ada pikiran.
Dan manusia saja yang bisa mengatur semua. Itulah kelebihan ciptaan Tuhan. Karena ini kepentingan universal sebenarnya.
ketika tanah itu habis, tumbuh-tumbuhan itu tidak ada yang menghasilkan biji.
Alam nggak akan kemana-mana, bumi nggak bakalan kemana-mana. Mereka akan terus berevolusi, mau itu ada climate change atau mau global warming atau apa. Tapi bila manusia tetap mau tinggal di sini, mereka harus berubah.
Dengan film tema ini, masyarakat menyadari tentang bagaimana menjaga lingkungan, khususnya menjaga mata air.
Kita perempuan jangan kita ketinggalan. Pasti kita bisa juga kalau kita lakukan sesuatu.
Ini jangan dilapisin, nggak usah pakai plastik.
Kalau yang terputus dari alam itu adalah banyak masyarakat kota, ya harusnya ada solusi di kota gitu, karena orang jadi bisa terlibat dan dia tahu perannya itu apa untuk memelankan mungkin istilahnya perubahan iklim itu sendiri.
Saya sering bertanya bagaimana kita bisa ngeklaim Islam itu sebagai rahmat seluruh alam pada saat kita sendiri telah berhenti menjadi rahmat bagi tubuh kita.
Thank you. So this is a film, it's a documentary film. We followed 7 communities, 7 people, 7 families across Indonesia. And we followed their activities and also to get to know them more, because they've done something for the environment based on their faith, based on their beliefs. And we want to dig it out. We want to share it to the people. So why 7 places? I think 7 would represent Indonesia. It's a good number to represent Indonesia in terms of religion, because we have like 5 formal religion, 1, and all of them are here: Muslims, Christian, Catholics, Hindus, and also the ancestor believers, which will be recognized or recognized already formally in Indonesia. And also we have 1 representation of people who live in urban area. And the beauty of making documentaries is that you can also learn as a filmmaker. At the beginning, I didn't know what I was making. I just want to know is there someone out there who's done something for the environment based on their beliefs? And when I made the film, through the process, I find more than just that. I find something more beautiful than just what I was planned before. What I realized, one of them is, climate change is something that is abstract, something that is big. We don't know what to do with it. And mostly I found it from people who live in urban area. But people who live in rural areas, most of the location are, it's very real. At least they're used to with the microclimate change. They're used to with changes that affected by their actions. If they cut down the trees, temperatures goes up, less water. And I think this message or these stories has to be brought to the city, to the urban area. That's why we make this film to be screened in cinemas, because people who live in the urban area needs to know what's happening out there. I'm not going to show it to people who live in the rural areas. It's like singing to the choir. They know better than us about this. So I think people who live in the city needs to get the better understanding of what's going on out there. It's very easy to adapt on climate change in urban area, air conditioner, this and that, food. But people who live in the rural areas, they have seen it, they've experienced it. And I found 7 people who've done something about it. And this is truly inspiring, and this is what we need, I think, right now. Warriors, people who are respected in their communities, who can develop influence and could make a change. And these people are very genuine. They have nothing more than just wanting to survive, wanting to adapt, wanting to make a better living. They have no intention of making climate change as politics to gain some money and all that. This is very pure, and I want these people to be heard. I want these people to be unsung warriors who can inspire people who live in a big cities. So this film will be released in January next year, and I hope it will get a good reception, and I hope next year I can come here again to probably give you a little bit overview of the result, and probably it will make a change. So cinema is very important to me, and it's been part of my life. And I think if you want to make a change, make a film, make a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. Ladies and gentlemen, we all hear from all the panelists, 5 distinguished panelists. I think we still have plenty of time. We will be discussing this issue until 11:50, if I'm not mistaken. So we still have plenty of time. Now, before we discussing among the panelists, I would like to give the opportunity to the audience to raise and ask the questions. And number one, what else? 2, 3, oh my goodness, so many. 1, 2, 3, 4. We start from the guy over there, and then followed by the lady on the front, and after that. Please please mention your name, your title, where you come from, and what your interest and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Pandu. I'm from Indonesia. I'm working in Association of Solar Energy in Indonesia. But I also volunteer in some NGOs that function in waste and environmental. Thank you for all the storytellers here and all influencers that you have done really great job. And then to the questions, maybe for all and maybe also specifically for Nicholas Saputra, because maybe for all international friends in here, nobody doesn't know who Mr. Nicholas is in Indonesia. He's really powerful in influencing message and also for the anything news about in Indonesia. My question is, what is your personal target to bring the issues into people's in Indonesia priority in their mindset? Also maybe for all influencers in here. Because as I know that we had another documentary movie also several times ago. It called Sexy Killer, talking a documentary film movie about coal energy and all the story behind that. But in my opinion, it became viral in Indonesia because there is a linkage the story with the politics. That's why it's become the priority of Indonesia mindset. But after that, after several months, it goes disappear, and nobody's doing any action following that movie. So maybe the question is, what is your personal target for your movie? To change the mindset of people in Indonesia, climate change priority in the mindsets, and maybe what is any way that we can do together, all of us in here, that we can bring this issue to be the priority of in the community. Thank you.
Okay, please, Nico, you can answer that questions.
Thank you very much for the compliments, and it's too much for me. And also for the questions. The target for my film is, I think, I just want to touch people's heart. This is, I would call it a positive documentary. We won't see destructions. We won't see politics playing around in this area. This is people's life. This is people's reacting to what's happening in their small areas, in their environment. And also why religion or faith is the angle is because I want to touch people's heart. And this is the best way to make a change. I think when you touch their heart, it will be there forever. Politics will changes, and it will work temporarily. So what I hope that people can do small actions. Climate change is something big, something out there. It's the talk of of the world leader, but changes are also happening in our environment, and people should do something about it. And this film shows different kind of places in different areas, islands, mountains, variety of areas, including urban. So I hope people can be inspired that, like in anywhere we are, we can do something about it, no matter what. And I think it should coming from your heart, because then you know what's best for you. I think that would be the target. And also poking people, like if you think you're a good Muslim, you think you're a good Christian, if you think you're a good Hindu, you should take care of your environment. Because the religion taught you so, and why don't you do that? Why don't you talk about it? That would be the main idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico, for the answering that questions. Because you also addressed that question to those panelists, I would like to give an opportunity to other panelists. If would you like to add some more information, Greg, Ethan, or Patrice, or Ibu Amanda, if you would like to add some more information? Okay. If not, I would like to give an opportunity to the lady to ask questions. Please mention your name and the institution and the questions.
Hello everyone, my name is Maria from Climate Rangers Jakarta. Actually, I want to ask because I also represented 3,000 teenagers in Indonesia, young people who went to the street on 20 September. It's called Jeddah Eclipse, it's global climate strike. So in 11 years, we need to keep the temperature at 1.5 degrees. And at the moment, most of us, we will be in 30 or 40 in our age. It's our golden era. How do you think? Because this action and this movement is really big in Indonesia, and it seems that nobody heard about our action. We want the direct action from the government, how to combat the climate change. With storytelling, I want to know, most of us is already surrounding, it's already tired and anxious, how it will be in the future. Can you give us advice in the future, how we can deliver our message in order can be heard by the politician and also wider community? Thank you.
Sorry, your question addressed to the whole panelists or only?
Yeah, I would like to hear from Mr. Greg and also the others if they have some advice for us. Thank you.
Okay, very short explanation. Greg, please answer that question.
Well, thank you for the question, and you've raised a very important issue. And it's interesting to think about young people as storytellers. In a way, if you're of the younger generation, you don't need to wait until you get to be my age to be a storyteller. You can tell stories when you're 10. You can tell stories. I mean, Greta is telling stories. My students who are 18 and 19 are telling stories. But some of the stories they tell are about future stories. They're about the scenarios that they want to live in, not what's in the past. We often think of stories as something that happened in the past, but stories can be about the kind of futures that we want for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren. And in fact, one of the things I do in some of the workshops I run, I ask people to tell me the stories that are important to them a generation from now, 20 years, 25 years. And what I find is when we tell those stories about, say, the climate, people have a lot in common. They might have differences today, but when they think 20, 25 years ahead, the kind of world they want to live in, the kind of villages they want to live in, the communities they want to live in, the kinds of livelihoods they hope they can support, they share those. So I think it's important that your generation tell your story about why these issues are important to you, why this is, as one of my students said, this is the issue of her life. And see yourself as storytellers to educate the politicians, the elders, the people of my generation. So I thank you for certainly you're sharing your views.
Thank you, Greg. Before you want to add some? Okay, please, Ethan.
First of all, thank you for the work that you all have been doing. Youth is our biggest ally right now in this climate fight. And I think the last year in particular has shown how large of a disconnect there is between what's happening on the streets and what's happening in our minds and that government policy making that's actually happening. I do think Greg is right. You want to talk about the future that you see. I don't know how well that connects to government policymakers right now. What are the benefits to them? What are the solutions at hand to them? I don't think they're as well informed as you might think. So there are two steps to this. First of all, how does the policy making that is happening right now that is failing your generation, how does it affect the current generation? Things like health benefits. Coal plants are terrible for your health. Jakarta does not have good air quality. Many cities around the world do not have good air quality. There is no reason why coal should be promoted in any way right now. When we're talking, I think the stats said about 5-10 years in Indonesia, new renewable energy will be cheaper than existing coal plants. So that is a short-term benefit that they can look at and say, this is good for us, this is good for our economy, this is good for our population. Secondly, I think that reaching as many people as you possibly can is super important. What we would call a catalytic approach. So at Climate Reality, if you're a climate reality leader, like many on this stage are, you are able to use the Al Gore slideshow and get together a presentation of 5 people, 10 people, 100 people. All of those people now know about climate change, they know what the solutions are, and they know what you can do to act. That's important because they will then take that information and spread it to 5, 10, 100 people of their own. All of a sudden, the Indonesian population not only knows about climate change, but knows what to do about it and begins to put pressure on policymakers to make those changes because they're in everyone's benefit.
Okay, Beatrice, very short, because we still have 2 questions.
Hi, Maria. Hi. Thank you for your question and thank you for the wonderful work you've been doing with Climate Rangers. One thing that's been effective and that I've been seeing a lot of youth climate strikers in the Philippines are doing is that they relate climate change to different sectors. So for example, you might have all heard about the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines decision the other day, finding that fossil fuel companies have a human rights responsibility towards general population. So what they did for Jefferson and the others, you know them, they related climate change as a human rights issue. And another group of climate strikers, they related climate change as a health issue because of how coal plants emit particulate matter 2.5 and how it affects everyone who's in the vicinity. And for the feminists and women constituency, they relate how climate change poses specific vulnerabilities to women, especially women of color. So I think one thing that we can remember about climate, it's not just a scientific issue or a political issue, and that we can reach a wider population by simply catering to whatever they're interested about. Everyone's interested in something, whether that's health, human rights, gender rights, whatever, and relating how climate change affects to that will definitely help, in my opinion. So thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. So we give it to this gentleman. After that, you, sir. So give it for him first, and then the next one.
Thank you for the word, everyone. I'm a Swedish entrepreneur from the country of Greta. And I'm working with a business model, build, own, operate, transfer mode. And I can tell you the good news in everything is that the technology to make coal kicked out commercially without any subsidies. I mean, only this year, I'm replacing 2,500 megawatts of coal-fired district heating and industrial heating in China only by investing $10,000.
Can you go straight to the questions?
Yes.
Because we have only 7 minutes left.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, the money is there, the technology is there, the business model is there. In Indonesia, we have no one, even I bring on energy minister level, who is able to pay for the feasibilities.
Yeah. So
with the
your
feasibilities,
questions?
so my question is it possible to gather with you, with others, to use the movies and visualizations to encourage Indonesian investors to, with your way of working, to get the feasibility studies? Because if you get the feasibility
Okay.
studies, then we can get
Yes.
and technologies.
Thank you. I think I got the point, your questions. And the questions is addressed to Nico, right? To the Nicolas. So very short, Nico, you can answer that question because we have only like 6 minutes left.
I'm inspired by one of our protagonists in the film who said that if you want to make a goodness, don't start with financial gain. If you want to make a goodness, make a goodness. I think that would be, because when you start something with the target of financial gain, they would be the start of a disaster.
Okay, thank you, Nico. We have only 4 minutes left. The last questions only. Please give it to him. Thank you.
Okay, I'm from Liberia. I'm also a film producer. I've produced 6 films. I've acted. I'm also an environmentalist. But the topic under discussion today, our storytelling, it was really captivating, and I want to really thank the panel. I knew about storytelling, but I did not know the importance of it. I'm also a poet, so maybe I could use poetry and, let's say, drama acting in trying to really promulgate the climate change issue. I really want to admonish you people for this program. It was very interesting, captivating, and I think very rewarding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's not a question. Thank you. Give a big applause to all of us. We have only 4 minutes left, and I don't think I would like to wrap up all the, all the information here today, but for sure, the topic that we are discussing today is very interesting, the storytelling to communicate climate crisis. And I think the most important thing is, it is our homework when we're going back to our home countries. You know that the communication objective, 3 only. First, how we change the cognitive side of the mankind, of the human. Cognitive, we're talking about information. And how to change the affective side of the communities. We're talking about emotion. And the last one is how to change the behavior. And the most important thing is how to change the behavior. So from all 5 panelists, how we can utilize those information to change the behavior of the communities, to support the climate action. That's the most important thing. And it is our homework. So, ladies and gentlemen, because the time is up, and I think we can discuss separately, not on the stage, with the panelists. And please give a big applause to all panelists. Thank you. I give it to the MC.
Thank you very much, Ibu Terzia. What an interesting session, I believe. And I would like to invite all speakers, including the moderator, to please come to the center of the stage for the giving of the token of appreciation that will be given by Bapak Nur Adiwardoyo on behalf of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And afterwards, please join for a quick photo session.